Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive into Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's all about how tiny changes can lead to some pretty remarkable results, and we're going to get into all of that.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how those small adjustments, when you apply them consistently, they can create this ripple effect and really transform your life in ways you might not even imagine.
And what I think is so cool about this book is that Clear, he doesn't just like talk the talk, he's lived it. Have you heard his
Oh,
story?
absolutely. His experience is like, it's a testament to this whole idea of atomic habits. Imagine you're a high school sophomore, you're on track to pursue your dreams, and then suddenly you're hit with this life-altering brain injury. It's almost unimaginable. Medically induced coma, having to relearn how to walk. That's starting from scratch. It makes you wonder, like, how do you even begin to rebuild your life after going through something like that?
And that's exactly what's so powerful about Clear's story, right? It would have been so easy to just give up, to think that achieving those dreams was impossible. But he didn't. He chose a different path, and he focused on those tiny gains day after day.
Okay, so let's unpack this idea of tiny gains a little bit. It's about those seemingly insignificant actions that we take consistently, right? Can you give me an example?
Think of it like this. Imagine you're shifting the nose of an airplane just a few degrees at takeoff. Now, the tiny change in direction might seem insignificant at first, but by the time you reach your destination, you could end up in a completely different country.
Wow, okay, that's a powerful image. So you're saying even the smallest adjustments to our habits, they can have this huge impact on our lives.
Precisely. It's about this compounding effect. Just like that airplane, those small course corrections over time, they can lead to dramatically different outcomes.
It reminds me of those like overnight success stories you hear about, the ones where someone seemingly comes out of nowhere to achieve incredible things, but behind the scenes, they've probably been putting in the work, making those tiny gains for years.
Exactly. Clear calls this the concept of lagging measures. Basically, the results of our efforts are often delayed. We might not see them immediately, but that doesn't mean they're not happening.
So it's like planting a seed. You don't see the sprout right away, but with consistent nurturing, it eventually breaks through the surface.
Exactly. Think about a time when you experienced a moment of success that felt sudden or unexpected. Now take a moment to reflect. What unseen efforts, what consistent actions led to that moment?
That's a great question. I think it makes you realize that success is rarely about one big push. It's about all those small steps we take, even when we don't see the immediate payoff.
And that's a perfect segue into the science of habit formation, which we'll explore next.
So we've established that even small changes can make a big difference over time. But how do we actually put this into practice? How do we go from understanding the why to mastering the how of habit formation?
Well, Clear breaks down the science of habit formation into what he calls the four laws of behavior change, which essentially form a feedback loop. He calls this loop the habit loop, and it consists of four stages: cue, craving, response, and reward.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's break down this habit loop. What exactly is a cue?
A cue is like a trigger for your brain, a piece of information that suggests a reward might be on the horizon. For our ancestors, cues were often things in their environment that signaled basic needs, like spotting a watering hole or a fruit tree.
So today, a cue might be something like seeing your phone light up with a notification, or maybe even just walking past the kitchen and smelling freshly baked cookies.
Exactly. Those sensory experiences trigger a craving, which is the motivational force behind every habit.
Okay, so the cue sparks the craving. What happens next?
The craving then leads to the response, which is the actual habit itself. Let's say you see that notification on your phone. The craving is that little dopamine hit you get from checking to see what it is. So the response is picking up your phone and taking a look.
And then, of course, there's the reward. That's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely. The reward is the satisfying feeling or outcome that reinforces the entire habit loop. You check your phone, you see a message from a friend, or maybe you get a few likes on a social media post, boom, dopamine rush.
Hmm.
That feeling of reward makes you much more likely to repeat the entire cycle in the future.
It's like this continuous loop constantly reinforcing itself. The cue triggers the craving, which drives the response, and then the reward strengthens the entire sequence.
Exactly. And here's the interesting part. As you repeat this loop, the connection between those neurons in your brain gets stronger, making the habit more automatic. Eventually, you no longer have to think about it. It becomes almost subconscious.
That makes a lot of sense, but it also makes me realize how powerful our environment can be in shaping our habits. I mean, if we're constantly surrounded by cues that trigger those unhealthy cravings, it's going to be that much harder to break the cycle.
You've hit on a critical point. Clear emphasizes the power of environment design in shaping our habits. We often think of habits as purely internal, driven solely by willpower, but our surroundings play a much larger role than we realize. Think about it. If you keep a bowl of candy on your desk, you're far more likely to snack throughout the day than if it's tucked away in a cupboard.
Oh, absolutely. Out of sight, out of mind. Right. But I also think it works the other way around. If we can strategically design our environment to make it easier to engage in positive habits, that can make a huge difference.
Precisely. Clear highlights this with a fascinating example from the Japanese railway system. To enhance safety and reduce errors, they implemented a system called point and call, where train operators are required to physically point at signals and call out commands, even for seemingly simple tasks.
So even though they've done those tasks thousands of times, they're still bringing that conscious awareness to each action.
Exactly. And the results were remarkable. This simple act of acknowledging each step significantly increased focus and reduced errors.
It makes you wonder how we can apply this principle to our own lives and habits. What would it look like to be more mindful and deliberate in our everyday actions?
That's where the habits scorecard comes in. It's a tool. Clear suggests to help us become more aware of our unconscious behaviors. Imagine taking a day and writing down all of your habits from the moment you wake up to the time you go to bed.
That's a great exercise. It makes you really confront those automatic behaviors you don't even realize you're doing.
Exactly. Once you have your list, the next step is to go through and label each habit as positive, negative, or neutral. This simple act of bringing awareness to your habits can be surprisingly powerful. It helps you identify areas where you'd like to make changes and provides a starting point for building new, positive routines.
It's like holding up a mirror to your daily routine. You can't change what you don't acknowledge, right? So, once we've identified those habits we want to build, what's next? How do we actually make them stick?
Well, Clear suggests a powerful strategy called habit stacking, which we'll dive into after the break.
So we've uncovered the power of tiny gains and, we've gotten into the science behind the habit loop, but how do we take all of that knowledge and actually build those lasting habits? You mentioned habit stacking before the break. What's that all about?
Yeah, habit stacking is a really cool strategy, I think, for making new habits stick. And it works by linking them to those habits you already have. Think about the things you already do consistently, almost without thinking. Things like, brushing your teeth, making your morning coffee, maybe taking a walk after lunch. These are like your anchor habits.
Okay, so we've got these anchor habits, these routines that are already ingrained in our lives. How do we use those to build new habits?
It's all about creating this really clear and specific connection. So instead of just saying, I want to meditate more, you might say, after I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate for 5 minutes. So you're basically piggybacking on the existing neural pathway of that anchor habit, making it way easier to kind of integrate that new behavior into your routine.
So the key is to make the link between the anchor habit and the new habit super obvious, right? It's like creating this mental reminder system for yourself.
Precisely. The more specific and immediate that connection, the more likely you are to actually follow through with it.
This is making a lot of sense. And it seems like there's something inherently satisfying about stacking one habit onto another, like creating this chain reaction of positive actions throughout your day. But I'm also curious about, the flip side of this. We've talked a lot about building good habits, but what about breaking bad ones? How do we deal with those ingrained behaviors that we're trying to eliminate?
That's where Clear's inversion of the 4 laws of behavior change comes in. Essentially, you're flipping the script on those bad habits, making them less appealing, harder to actually perform.
Okay, so it's about understanding those 4 stages: cue, craving, response, reward, and then finding ways to disrupt that cycle.
Exactly. For example, let's say you're trying to reduce your social media use. You might start by making the cue less obvious, right? Turn off those tempting notifications, delete the apps from your home screen, or even physically put your phone in another room for a few hours each day.
It's about making those bad habits less visible, less enticing, right? If you don't see it, you're less likely to think about it.
Precisely. And just like we talked about making good habits attractive and convenient, you actually want to make those bad habits unattractive and more difficult. So let's say you're trying to break this habit of late-night snacking. You could make it less appealing by removing those tempting snacks from your pantry, or even just replacing them with healthier options. To make it less convenient, you might even unplug the microwave or put away all your dishes at night, so it's just a bigger hassle to indulge in that craving.
So it's not just about willpower, it's about changing your environment to remove those temptations and make those bad habits harder to perform.
Exactly.
Mm.
Claire illustrates this with this kind of fascinating historical anecdote about this guy, James Ritty, a saloon owner in the 1800s. And he was having problems with his employees stealing from him. And he tried everything to stop it, but nothing seemed to work. And then he finally came up with this, brilliant solution.
What do you do?
He invented the cash register. Ritty realized that by making it physically impossible for employees to pocket the cash, he could effectively eliminate the problem. It's a fantastic example of changing the environment to make a bad habit practically impossible to do.
Wow, I never knew the cash register had such a fascinating origin story. It really highlights this power of making those bad habits impractical. And it makes you wonder, how can we apply this in our own lives, especially with technology?
That's such an important point.
Mhm.
Technology can be like a blessing and a curse when it comes to habit formation. On the one hand, it can help us automate good habits, like setting reminders to exercise or using apps to track our progress. But it can also create really powerful temptations and make it much easier to fall into bad habits. Think about the autoplay feature on streaming services designed to keep you hooked, making it harder to resist that urge to watch just one more episode.
It's like this constant battle between convenience and intentionality.
Precisely. The key here is to be mindful of how technology is shaping our behaviors and to use it strategically to support our goals, not work against them.
Well, this deep dive into atomic habits has been seriously eye-opening, I gotta say. It's incredible how these small, seemingly insignificant changes can have such a big impact on our lives. Imagine if you improved just 1% each day, where would you be a year from now?
It's remarkable, isn't it? And remember, you don't have to overhaul your entire life overnight. Start small, focus on those tiny gains, be patient with yourself, and the results, they'll speak for themselves.
It's been awesome diving into all of this with you. And for our listeners, we'd love to hear your takeaways. What small habit are you going to focus on, building or maybe even breaking? Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.